Welcome, everybody, to day 2 of Remembering the Truth of Who We Are. I'm your host, Jocelyn Mercado, and I'm so excited to gather with you again today. We had amazing interviews yesterday, and I am looking forward to more of the same today. Let's see here. I am just bringing Tayria in. Hi. Let's see. I think I need to unmute you. Here we go. Hi, welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
So we will give people just another minute or two to join. We have lots and lots of people on already, but I'm sure more are just signing in right now. And I hope everybody was able to listen to yesterday's interviews we had. They were just really delightful. Really wonderful.
I enjoyed the one. Right. They were just really great. Yeah. Yeah. I hope everyone will. And I'm sure that's going to be the same today. It's just really a rich offering you're creating here, Jocelyn.
Thank you.
Really something.
Yeah. I'm so glad you're a part of it, Tayria. So glad.
It's certainly a pleasure, privilege. Yeah.
Yeah, and I welcome everybody. Now on this second day, I really welcome everybody as you're joining to put your name and location in the chat. Hi, Lauren Rose in Paris. So glad to see you. Because we are forming a global community here, and it's so important to really acknowledge and accentuate that community aspect, because we're in this together, and this is a group of visionaries and revolutionaries, right? I have no doubt. All of us are feeling the call to something bigger than ourselves. So let's all really get to know each other. And I just love seeing everybody's names and locations pop up. Wonderful, wonderful. Hi to Nicola in Wales. Hi to Barbara in Wisconsin. Glad to see you here, Barb. Hi, Diana in Ontario. Welcome, everybody. Hi, Mallory in the UK. Hi, Tina in Tennessee. So beautiful to see everybody here. So I'll let you all check out each other's locations and get to know each other a little bit in the chat as we go forward. And today's interview will be with Dr. Tayria Ward, my dear friend. I'm so glad to have you here as a part of this event, and just can't wait to have this conversation with you.
Same with you. It's just a delight to be here, and I'm looking forward to talking.
Yeah, can't wait. And so let me go ahead and just read your bio for those who don't already know you. And I know many people got to know you a little bit yesterday and are going to get to know you even better today, which is wonderful. So Dr. Tayria Ward, PhD, is the co-host for Remembering the Truth of Who We Are, and you will see her on many of the future interviews that we're going to be doing. She has worked intensively with her own and other people's dreams for more than 40 years. And for nearly 20 years, she has been an avid student of Indigenous ways of knowing and being. In 2004, she established Bridging Worlds, a center for working with individuals and groups to bridge the waking mind with the dreaming mind, the domesticated self with the indigenous self, culture with nature, the visible with the invisible, and conscious with the unconscious. And presently, she has a private practice specializing in dream analysis in Asheville, North Carolina, one of my favorite places in the world, where she works with clients in person, by Skype, and by telephone. She also offers dream groups, workshops, retreats, and lectures. She has a PhD in depth psychology from Pacifica Graduate Institute. Previously, she was a minister in an interfaith organization for 20 years, a professor at undergraduate and graduate levels, and owner of a retreat center in the remote mountains of Western North Carolina, where she conducted regular retreats and vision quests. So your wonderful topic for today, Tayria, is the importance of reviving our suppressed histories. And I can't wait to talk with you about this. So could you begin by telling us what piqued your interest in this topic? What got you thinking about this idea of our suppressed histories?
Well, Jocelyn, I mean, in a certain way, I've always had a sense of just curiosity and interest about the origins of things and how to like look below the surface of what we see, like above where the tree is above, what's in the root system of what we're looking at. So in some sense, I've always had a real interest in what is beneath the surface of our consciousness or awareness. But I got really called into this subject just in the last year, in a very specific way. So at this point, I feel like the events, which I'll describe in a few minutes, are kind of leading me down a path, and I'm not sure where the path is going. So I'm not at the destination yet. I'm just sort of picking up the breadcrumbs that are kind of leading me down this path. So that's kind of what I want to do with our listeners today, is just kind of like, we'll pick up a few breadcrumbs and go down the path and see where it's taking us. Before I start with my story, I just think it's so fascinating that maybe some of you have seen that on the news in the last, just recent time, I think the last couple of weeks, they've been showing us this Mayan city that has been discovered underneath the rainforest in Guatemala. And now it's surfacing in I don't know, visually, somehow they're able to see it underneath the forest that grew over it. Wow. And so to me, that's like an image of what I feel like these suppressed histories are when they start rising into consciousness. It's like underneath the forest of our psychological life and all of our experiences suddenly starts rising this civilization that's beneath that, collectively and personally. So just kind of use that as an image for what I'm describing here of something surfacing into our psyches and consciousness that it will be useful information, and certainly interesting. So last August, I think it was, I was in New Mexico. You were there. We were studying with lovely indigenous teacher, Arkan Lushwala. And Arkan is from Peru. And so during the days that we were learning from him, doing a lot of dream work and doing, he was teaching us these great wisdom stories that he has been able to recover from his own people's suppressed histories of the Incas. And so apparently, I was so fascinated with his stories about how the Incas' wisdom and histories were suppressed. And largely that was because when the Spanish came in and decided, and presumably it was bringing the Roman Catholic religion, I think. But I think there were economic and other reasons that they were taking the Incas completely away through like horrible deeds, like genocides, just like wiping out the Incan traditions so that even their wisdom could not survive. And their stories and their cosmology, the information that they had developed. And as Arkan was saying, that the Incas were not just a race, it was a way of life. It was a whole ideology, a whole cosmology. So it's, so when this happened, the Incas, what they knew, how they saw the world, how they were able to interpret the world and tell the story, our origin stories, all of that was taken away and suppressed. And anybody who tried to keep that alive was in danger of being wiped out through the genocides that were taking place then. And so Arkan is like a voice for recovering and remembering. And he was teaching us some of these stories and ways to describe so many things. like I especially loved the stories, and hopefully Arkan has it in his new book. He has a new book called Deer and Thunder?
Yeah, Deer and Thunder. I'll put the link in the chat so people can check that out. Yeah, it looks amazing. I haven't bought it yet, but it looks amazing.
I've ordered it. It'll be in the mail in a couple days. It just came out, and he has another one called The Time of the Black Jaguar, which I really love. But hopefully some of the Incan teachings will be more in his new book too, as well. So I was really struck by how this happens in our human history, how something is taken away from us that is of such deep, immense value, and then taken out of our conscious life and really goes into the unconscious. So I did that in August, and then in September, interestingly, I went on a pilgrimage with Veronica Goodchild, who was also going to be a speaker on this event, the Remembering Who We Are event. And Veronica led a pilgrimage in the south of France and the north of Spain. And the intent of the pilgrimage was to go to a lot of the Black Madonna sites and the Mary Magdalene sites and revive the stories of the early Christian world. And there are histories there of Mary Magdalene and her work in the world that was then taken away again by when the Catholic Church, or the Roman Catholic Church, decided that they were going to tell the story, and they were going to tell it only in a certain way. And so there is evidence there that Mary Magdalene was equal to Jesus in her consciousness and in her work, that she was a divine, she was understood to be a divine priestess, in the tradition of Isis, actually, and trained in that way, and that she and Jesus worked together in ways that have not been understood. Possibly they were married, and there's a bloodline and a lineage there, and there's a lot of evidence in these places of the stories. However, when this history got suppressed, it was a similar thing. And we went to some of the sites where some of the Cathars and the Knights Templar, those who practiced this early form of Christian religion, were wiped out. I mean, again, it was a genocide. They were taken out, whole villages, babies, young people, old people, everybody just gathered up in whole villages of them and burned. And if you talk to anybody that was part of that religion, they would come after you and your family just because it would pollute your own mind, or you can't be a carrier of those stories. So it was very dangerous to keep alive what was known in the early centuries after the Christian story unfolded with Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And so that again was suppressed and taken away. And I've always heard that history is written by the winners, and that's what Archon was saying about the Spanish came in and they told the Incan history the way they wanted it to be told. So he said he said we couldn't tell our own story because we couldn't read and write the way the Spanish could. So the Spanish were able to just record Incan history, which they did not know. And that's the history that modernity has of the Incas, what the winners, the conquerors decided to tell about it. And that, I believe, is the same story with, very possibly with the Christian religion, that the Roman putting down the feminine, it was when the patriarchal mood was really hitting the collective psyche, and women couldn't be owners of land. And so there were all different economic reasons that they had to suppress the feminine in order to create the world as they decided it should happen. And the story, the Christian story, the way decided it should happen. So then I came home and I thought, this is quite interesting because it was an unexpected. I went on both of these trips for a couple of different reasons, but I didn't know that I was going to be so kind of overcome with this awareness of how our histories are taken from us, and have been suppressed, and the value and importance of reviving them. because it's all in the unconscious. It's all there, and there's a way that we know it, but we can't find it because it's hard to make it conscious. And so I think it's interrupting our connection to who we really are as a species, as a collective, and individually. And then what was interesting, as soon as I got back from France and Spain, the Me Too movement was just gearing up. And so talk about suppressed histories. Here were people who had these stories that they'd been sitting on for decades and suffering with, and the ways that a more patriarchal worldview was able to suppress the stories and prevail. So I thought, this is more of that. There's something about these suppressed histories that I just felt like it was trying to catch my consciousness and tell me, here's some more breadcrumbs. Just keep going down this path and see what it has for you. And I did a divination with a lovely person. His name's Cater Brown, and he's also going to be a speaker on this
Monday.
Event. Yes, on Monday. And he has a beautiful method of divination that he learned in West Africa. So I did a divination with him, and part of what was coming through in the story that he was helping me to see was there was an image for someone who was my paternal grandfather. It's cowrie shells and all these different objects that get tossed in a certain way, and then the way they fall is how they read the story of your divination. So he asked me about my paternal grandfather. Well, the story of him is that he died by suicide, and my mother never told us that. That was discovered by a cousin who went into she was doing ancestor work, and she found it in a newspaper and told us. So I never heard that from my mother. My older sister then told me later that mother had told her that. She said she talked to her for about 1 minute once, and that was it. So that was really a suppressed history in our family. And it was interesting the way the suicidal ideation was haunting me all through my life. And I kept having people close to me, very close to me, that were committing suicide. And I felt like suicide was a haunting. And then when I found out my grandfather had that experience, and that my mother had been so wounded by it that she couldn't even speak of it in all our lives, I thought, here's another suppressed history. And so in this divination, there was a little line that went down to this symbol that was also of my grandson. And so the information seemed to be there that I need to do the psychological work around this. We do the psychological work of those in our own ancestry so that it doesn't get passed on down through. So that I'm called upon now to work with this ideation, to work with the trauma that my mother simply didn't have the tools or the means to work with, nor did her siblings or her mother. And then I could see clearly that if I don't do the work, it's going to keep going down through the generations in an interesting way. So that the importance of recovering our personal as well as our collective histories, so that we don't afflict the future generations with not having the information or not having worked out the traumas of what took place, certainly with all of this being taken away from us. And that the information flow is like the whole, it goes into our DNA. The trauma actually goes into the DNA so that future generations will run across it, will have it in their actual genetic makeup. And that what we know and the psychological work we do actually affects the genes and the DNA. So, and Jung was quite articulate about that in many ways. So, and I remember when I was working on my dissertation, it came to me like a bolt of lightning that I was doing a lot of work at the time, psychological work, certainly because I was doing a depth psychology degree, so that instigated a lot of psychological work. And I was going through divorce, which also was an instigator of a lot of psychological work. And then it hit me. It came like as a voice from above that said, the greatest inheritance you can give your children is the psychological work that you do. Mm-hmm. And I knew that it's not about money or land or property nearly as much as it is about really working through making conscious what's in the unconscious that just drives us and runs us until we can make it conscious and learn to shift the stories and the energies through our work, our psychological work. And I remembered too, Carl Jung telling a story, I think that's so interesting, of a man who brought his young son into Jung. And the son was having all these nightmares, night after night after night was having nightmares. And as Jung was trying to help the son, he realized that the father was not doing his own work. And so he suggested to the father that he come into analysis and work with Jung. And so as the father worked with Jung and began to do his own recovery from the stories that he had suppressed, his son's nightmares just stopped. So I think that's a really good story to let us know, like what my message was saying, that the psychological work we do will relieve the generations to come. And I've been thinking, it's so interesting how we have a ancestral lineage that whatever we can do to revive those stories, and it doesn't have to be that we go in and read everybody's biography, because that's not possible on the one hand. And on the other hand, it would be a distraction, basically. I think we start to get the patterns of what's in our ancestral lineage if we're paying attention. And if we're doing the work with the ancestor work, which some of our speakers also will be talking about, Daniel Fuhr will be giving some good information on doing ancestor work, and I think some others too. So that we have ancestral work to do, but I'm also becoming more aware, and for various reasons, the trip to France made me even more acutely aware of the soul history of our own reincarnation stories. So there's the ancestral lineage stories, but there's the soul history stories for each of us through our reincarnation stories, and that the more we are able to work with that as that arises, and sometimes there are various ways that arises, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go, but that it's dual. It's our collective ancestral history as well as our individual soul history. Then the work of reviving the suppressed histories there, and then doing the work to kind of free ourselves from the patterns that have been set by not having done the work before, or not being able to. This is a evolutionary process.
Yeah. Do you mind if I say something?
Oh, please do, Jocelyn, anytime.
That idea of what we heal in this lifetime, gets passed on to the future generations. I think, I'm sure you'll remember, you and I were doing some work. You were actually helping me to work through a fear. Mm-hmm. And we went through a process, and there was some very clear imagery in that process. And it was of a bear. It was of a bear that the bear was representing my fear, and I needed to approach the bear. And it was very large and terrifying, and I needed to approach the bear. And when the bear turned around, it turned out to be just a small, frightened child.
Oh, yes. Oh, I love that. Yes.
That very night, my daughter, Sophia, who was 6 at the time, had a dream of almost the exact same thing happening in her dream. And I didn't tell her a thing about it. It was the very night after we did that work. So it's so connected. She had a dream that our family was in a house, and that there were bears trying to get in from all sides, and that we were terrified, and that we were hiding in closets and hiding wherever we could. and the bears came in, and it turned out they were friendly and they just wanted to talk to us. That was her dream. And so it's just so incredible how connected we are, and that, yes, our children and our grandchildren will be healed when we do this work. So powerful.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm reminded of something that Simone mentioned yesterday about facing the darkness, right? Not turning away, not feeling like we have to vibrate high all the time and only focus on the light and only focus on the good, because it's so important to work with these darker aspects of ourselves, because there's treasure beneath, right? There's healing and being able to pass on a healthier way to our children, our grandchildren, the next 7 generations when we do this healing work. And I think we're, many of us who are alive at this time are being called to do that, whether we want to or not. So if we can lean into it and welcome it, how powerful that is for how we can really evolve quickly in this lifetime when we accept our task, accept our responsibility of doing this kind of work.
Absolutely. And thank you. I'm so glad you brought that up, because Jung's work was so much about working with what's in the unconscious and what's been cast into the shadow of our nature. And his articulation, and the many that have worked with him and since then, would say that the real gold of our psychological life is in the shadow. It's what was been cast in the shadow. That's where we recover our real powers, our energy, our talents, the great truths that will help us to move forward and evolve in certain ways. So much of that's been cast into the unconscious and the shadows because of these traumas from early on, that we weren't able to work with it. When people are burning down your village, you have to come back and start climbing that hill again. And I love that dream. I remember when you were telling me that dream, and I also had a dream once of going out in my property, and I found a cage like in some remote piece of property that was my property in the dream. And I kind of rattled the cage, and I kind of like that metaphor, rattling the cage. Yeah. And all these monsters came out, and I was terrified in the dream. And I went running back to the house and was bolting up the staircase like 3 steps at a time, like a child does when they're just running for dear life. And I was just terrified. And suddenly something occurred to me in the dream that said, just turn around and see what they want. So I was bolting up this staircase, and I sat down and turned around, and they jumped on my lap, and they were just little babies. It was just like sweet little babies. So just like in your dream, that it just seems like it's going to be terrifying. And we're running away from our own shadow because there is this idea that it's terrifying. But the only thing really terrifying about it is that it's unknown, and we're afraid of the unknown. If we can embrace the adventure of going into the unknown and allow for it, it's much more gentle and loving than we think it will be. I mean, certainly there's a rough ride that goes along with that. But so anyway, I'm so glad you brought that up. And so also, thinking about our ancestral lineage and our soul lineage, I think included in the soul lineage is this idea that before this earth system even came into being, there's high probability, and it's even starting to be discovered through science, that we had other lives, that we were actually, Buckminster Fuller said this, and it was so striking to me because he said it as a scientist, not as a metaphysical person, but as a scientist. He said, it's highly probable that we were beamed here from a star. And so we really actually have these lives in other systems, planetary systems, where we lived and had lives and consciousness and whatever we have been doing in our eternal soul nature, even before the earth was created, and will continue after the earth is gone. And that we, to understand this as our lineage too, this is kind of a suppressed story. This idea that we just live this one little life that's just this many years in this geography, I think in terms of who we really are, I think that's such a limiting way of thinking about what human existence is about, that it's this one limited life. And I feel like there's no way to understand causation. Why are some poor and some rich, and why are some sick, and why are, why all the many differences in terms of opportunity and so forth, that we go through all of these things in lifetimes, and we experience the many-sidedness of things, and we start to understand through recovering this history the causation, that there is causation, that it actually, this comes from something. There's something that we need to learn because of something that we weren't able to learn earlier, and there's something that we're leaving to our future self by doing the work that we're doing now, not just to our lineage ancestrally, but to our own future evolution if we do the work now. So
I have one thing to add to that too, if you don't mind.
Please. No, please.
A huge number of the original creation stories on every continent indicate that we came from the stars.
Oh, interesting.
And a great number of those indicate that we came from the Pleiades. So it's very fascinating. On every continent, you can find creation stories that point to the Pleiades as where human beings came from. So it's really incredible that there's that level, that much agreement, if you go back to the original stories. And I just watched a video that was on Facebook last night. I'll have to find a way to post it for this group, it was a Native American man of the Cree tribe. I believe that's southeastern US. I'm not completely sure. But he was showing a diagram of the constellation that I've always known as Orion. That's like the big X in the sky with the 3 stars across the middle. And we know it as Orion because that's how the Greek and Roman, astrologers named it. But he had a different name for it that I can't, I don't remember, but he had a different name, and it was a person in, a Native American looking person pointing, and where the finger points, if you look at it that way, is straight at the Pleiades. So it's very powerful hearing this man talk about, and that's their origin story too, that this big, figure in the sky is pointing towards where we came from. So really, it's really beautiful. So there's something to that.
Yeah, there is something. That reminds me too of some of the things we were learning in the south of France, is that because of the suppression of the information, the people who tried to keep it alive had to come up with symbols that were pointing to things. So if you now, some of the ones who are the Cathars and some of the others that who have survived all this are able to read how it was embedded, even as they were building their little Catholic churches. Some of the people there were imprinting the history in these symbolic ways so that it actually could survive. And in some cases, they have like the eyes of the statue of Mary Magdalene is looking in that direction, and there's something in that direction that is the tomb of somebody that's in, and they're all connected that way. So these pointings are there, and it's interesting, even just the Dead Sea Scrolls, how somebody buried all these scrolls, not ever knowing if they were going to be revived. But it's like these histories, there's such an importance to them that people know they have to imprint it symbolically or in the scrolls that'll get, maybe recovered thousands of years later. We can look to these histories, and that's the way our psyche works too. Our psyche is pointing. It's pointing to things, and it's about listening. It's really about discovering and listening and allowing for the information to come. I've been thinking that David Bohm, wonderful physicist, I used to teach his method of dialogue and studied a lot of his writings and work, but he talked about the structure of the brain and what happens in the brain, and he says the brain can't think a thought if it doesn't have a concept for it. So it's like if if we don't have a concept that a tree can actually talk to us, then we're not going to hear it. If you get the concept, things can change in the brain and you can start to get the information. So I think it's the same with knowing that these suppressed histories are there and there's all these signs and symbols that are working with us to help us find them. If we have the concept for it, then our brain can start to pick up the information. It's until we get the concept that it just runs by us and we will never know. So I think this kind of waking up now to just getting the concept can begin an unfolding and a revealing as we awaken ourselves just to the ideas even.
Yeah, there was one other thing that Archon shared that really stood out for me that I would love to share. So they, many of the Inca temples and buildings were destroyed, and Archon showed us when we were there, I'm sure you remember this, there was a crescent-shaped piece of very thin metal.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I can't remember what the type of metal was, but he said it conducts electricity. It's a type of metal that conducts electricity. It's a very good conductor. And he said when they took apart the temples, and when archaeologists go in now and discover the ruins of these temples, they find these little tiny pieces of metal all over the place, embedded in the walls, everywhere, scattered everywhere. And scientists, archaeologists, nobody can figure out what they were for. Why would they put these pieces of metals embedded in the walls of the temples? And Archon said, I know why. So reaching back within his lineage of those people, he had an understanding of why. And he said it was because, and you'll read about this if you read The Time of the Black Jaguar, which is his other book, we humans, our role is to raise the vibration of all beings and of the earth and even of the universe. And when we celebrate, when we sing, when we dance, when we light the sacred fires, when we hold sacred ceremony, we are raising the vibration. We have this vibrational ability to do that, to raise our own vibration and then share that, ripple it out to others. And he said these crescent-shaped strips of metal were built into the walls of all the temples because that would collect the energy of the people who were celebrating within the temples and send it out into the cosmos. And I mean, that's just incredible and with what you just said of, if we don't have a perception of it, if we don't have a concept of it, we can't believe it. But just think of that is possible for us. That is what these ancient people were doing. I trust Archon. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And to think that we still have that capability now, right? If we can reconnect with it, that's what the ancient people were doing. We're storing their energy and sending it out to raise the vibration of all beings. So it's just, it's so beautiful to reopen these treasures of who we really are, what we're really capable of.
Right. Yeah, I'm thinking, I'm just going with it. But what you were just saying reminded me of a story that when I was studying Bohm and starting to work with this, I heard somebody tell the story of that one of the young men who was part of the massacre at Columbine back then, that his mother had actually seen him leaving the house with like a machine gun or something hanging out of his gym bag. And she didn't even see it because she had no concept that her son could own it or be that person or anything. She didn't even see it. And it wasn't until after she found out what he had done that she realized that she had seen it, but her brain couldn't register it. Her brain simply could not register it. Yeah. So, I mean, that's sort of a dark example but it's like the brain won't register. If she'd had a concept that her son, might have been doing something like that, she might have seen it. But because she had no concept for it, the brain won't register it. So there's work to do on our concepts here to really open ourselves to what can be seen of the dark and the light so that we can start to work with it. I know one of Jung's, the saying that I remember of his as really key and core, he said for the human project, his understanding of what our job is as the human species is to make the unconscious conscious. So there's all that is the work, is there's all this driving us through that's unconscious. And in the sense, the earth and our bodies are the unconscious. It's the what's given to us in a certain way, humans in a certain specific way, to make that conscious, and that will evolve the planetary operation. That it's our job, basically, as a species, to do this work of making the unconscious conscious. And it's a great work. And I really appreciate what you're putting together here to assist us all in this great project and this great work.
It's all about here. Yeah. So I didn't mean to get you off track there.
No, I'm enjoying it. These are all breadcrumbs, right? We're just going down this path and seeing what it's there. Yeah. Yeah.
So could you share with us, how can someone work with their suppressed histories? What would you recommend?
Well, I was going to give a few examples of just ways that it has occurred for me. And a lot of it has been, I have had, ever since I was a teenager, even though I was raised Catholic and never taught in any kind of formal setting the idea of reincarnation or past lives, I can't even imagine or remember how I even knew that there had a concept for it, because certainly nobody in my family or my world where I was being educated was giving me that concept. But I did have a concept for it, and I would have spontaneous memories come to me of past lives that were quite interesting. And it's, they still come occasionally in various ways. And so I can just talk about allowing ourselves, giving ourselves the concept and allowing for the emergence of what can take place so that we can begin to remember who we really are. But I remember one night, I always think this is kind of interesting. My father at the time had passed away, and I was sleeping in his bed, in his bedroom. There were, it was a family time, and all the bedrooms were filled, and my bedroom had my kids in it. And so I was sleeping in my father's bed, and he wasn't, alive. And for some reason, I think that there's something about that I was in that sort of vibration of where my father was, and something bolted me out of sleep. And I sat up. I'll never forget it. It was like my spine suddenly got 2 feet taller. I was just like, whoa. And the question was, who am I? I realized I had not a concept, not a clue. And at that time, I had small children. I had a husband. I had a career. I was a minister, and I really knew what I was doing. I mean, I had a vocation and a calling that I was living very fully and happily. So I wasn't really struggling with identity issues, but something really bolted me, like, out of my sleep. And I almost wonder if it was my father saying, there's just so much more you're going to have to know, honey. Something about the fact that I was right there in his former bedroom. Yeah. And that really started me on a journey. I mean, I just hadn't asked myself the question. I thought I had a pretty good sense of identity and a concept for who I had been and was. So I think when things like pull you out of sleep like that, really to pay attention to it. And some years after that, I don't know how many years exactly when that happened, but I was ordained in the ministry. It was a interfaith kind of ministry. And I loved it very much and was quite committed to it. And suddenly it started to unravel my whole idea of what I think. I've been reading Jung, and I think this who am I question was just getting bigger. And I remember getting this like message that said, I need a sweat lodge. Now, at that time in my life, I didn't know anybody who did sweat lodges. As far as I knew, they were thousands of years old and nobody ever did them. I didn't know anybody in my current world who did sweat lodges. And it came to me so strongly that I didn't even question it. It's like, okay, I need a sweat lodge. And then I happened to meet the neighbor of a somebody who told me that the sweat lodges were being done by this woman who was a Native American woman living in the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles. That's where I lived at the time. And so I found this woman, and she invited me to one of their sweat lodges, and it was quite an experience. And as soon as I was in the sweat lodge, I thought, the words came to me, I need a vision quest. And I don't even know how I'd ever heard of a vision quest at the time. I was studying the world's religions, but not indigenous spirituality at all. I was unfamiliar really with it. And this was coming from someplace else. So I asked this woman after the sweat lodge, I said, do you know anybody who does vision quests? And she says, I can take you out on the mountain. We can do this. So I was able to do a vision quest, and it wasn't too long after that, in fact, it was only actually, by the time it happened, a matter of days after that I ended up resigning from the ministry. Just got the vision and the clarity for what I needed to do and the strength to do it, which was a very rough decision for me to make. Still a lot of fallout from that in my life in a certain way, but it had to happen. As you know, you've made these kind of choices. But it's to listen to these voices that seem to come from nowhere and acknowledge that something in our soul history is moving us forward. And then as I was doing my doctoral work, after I resigned, I went to get my doctorate in the depth psychology because of Jung's interest in dreams, and I'd always been interested in dreams. I started being attracted to the indigenous studies, and various synchronicities led me into it. That was not something I had expected would happen, and then I started getting spontaneous memories of having been in indigenous communities that we were removed from our land, and our ways of life were suppressed, and the trauma of that. And I think I was trying to I understood now where those messages had come from, why I needed to do those ceremonies, and then why I needed to work on my dissertation, which was about reawakening indigenous sensibilities in the Western psyche. And for me, I will just say the indigenous is, I didn't do it as an ethnographic kind of study. I studied indigenous ways and peoples and beliefs and cosmologies from people all over the world. But I believe that we are, all people of every color are indigenous in our basic soul. So for me, it's like, that's who we all are. And I know there's, there are indigenous peoples who don't like the idea that white people talk about the indigenous wisdom. But I will say, and I respect that. I understand, how that can sometimes dilute and corrupt their own cosmology and so forth. But I will say also that I believe all of us are the indigenous peoples. That the long lineage of our ancestry is in the indigenous world, and it's only in the more recent eras that modernity has happened and that we have suppressed that. So. And I also thought I would share this story. I had an experience of, I was taking a nap one afternoon, and all of a sudden I found myself outside of my body, and I was floating above where my body was sleeping. I was aware of it, but I was connected to it, but I was not in it. And all these things happened. I mean, it was really something. I couldn't remember all of it, but I have a sense of all of it. Jesus was in my living room, and I mean, it was like I was in this whole other vibration completely. And then when it was time for me to wake up, I could feel myself. I'd never had the experience quite like it, but now I understand it. I could feel myself having to go back into this density, just like layers and dense layers of matter, I guess, and even of psyche, to get back in my body and then wake up. and then I understood in a way that I never have quite before, but will always sort of remember it, that how dense this system is that we're working with here, and the actual reality of our beings that live in this other way that is outside of the density of it, and how to sort of connect more with that part of ourselves that lives in this dream time and in the imaginal, as you were speaking of yesterday, that has this fluidity and capacity to be in this non-dense environment and bring it into the dense world that we are. And I feel that Indigenous people had the ways of working with that density, that we have gone more through our sort of machine cosmology in the last eras, into this density. But Indigenous people had their ceremonies and their ways of speaking to the river and the wind and the animals and the invisible realm and the ancestors. And all of that is sort of outside this density that we inhabit. And so that's part of our work now, is to sort of loosen our attachment to the density that just kind of is like a gravity that pulls us.
Yeah, that's such a striking image, to have to come back denser,
yeah,
and denser to get into this space that we occupy every day.
Yeah.
Something so
and I do think it's a consensual agreement that we made when we came into this Earth system, that the density is part of the what's here and what we're given to learn through. But I think it's something to attention of the opposites between the non-dense part and the dense part, and how do we get them to coordinate with one another and not forget that other part of ourselves.
Right.
How much more time do we have, Jocelyn?
Well, let's see. We can probably start the Q&A in maybe 10 or 15 minutes. Or it could be shorter than that. But is this a good time to share your exercise that you wanted to share with the group, or
yeah, I think so. Yeah, I have so many things that I could have done here, but I think I'll leave a lot of it for another time. So yeah, there is an exercise that I thought we could do just sort of briefly, that we can do right now, but hopefully just sort of take the idea of it and do it more in your quiet time and your quiet space. But the idea would be for everyone, maybe just sort of get comfortable, and if it's possible, put your feet on the ground, and close your eyes, or just get a soft gaze. And think of, just let something come to you about a certain dilemma or situation that is going on in your current life that troubles you or puzzles you or thrills you even. But something that's a little beyond your current understanding of why it's there and what's going on with it. So let just something float in. And now that you have some sense of what it is the question or what you're working with, see that dilemma or that situation as like the tree that is above ground and reaching up to the sky and the stars. And follow the energy into the root system of the tree. So this is like a shamanic journey into the root system of an actual tree, but more the root system of the psychological and spiritual situation in your life. And just go into that root system what is beneath the surface that's not known, not seen? Where do those roots of this situation reach to? And see if some story comes to mind, some pattern or situation or dilemma that has possibly not been available to consciousness that might be creating this situation in your life. And in this, it's like going into the imaginal, sort of trust whatever dreamlike story might come. So sit with that for a minute. And just make note of what are the questions that arise. And you can work with those questions later, but just let them occur. And consider, is there a deeper truth that can be uncovered or revealed in your own soul history, ancestral history, whatever it reaches into? What is the deeper truth that may be present in this waking life situation? And also ask yourself, what are the untruths or the lies or maybe wrong perceptions or wrong assumptions that were made back then that might be feeding your experience and might want to be revealed now? Were there some lies that you were told back then, some ways that you misunderstood that now is trying to be revealed so that you can understand and can uncover? And now I just suggest that you take a minute to come back. And if you have a pen or paper nearby, if there's anything that you want to work with later, maybe make a little note of it. Or if you don't have a pen or paper, just make it conscious what the questions are, what the truths, the lies, what might you start to see that's at the root of this waking life situation. And I think this is something that we can do anytime that we're working with. You know, life is always full of surprises day by day of things that occur that we sense that there's a root system there and we don't know what it is, and the patterns that keep reoccurring in our lives. There's a way that we can meditate and I think actually find the stories. And I want to say a little bit about reincarnation, that I just think that that is a suppressed history that for I think most religions of the world, reincarnation is just understood. And most of the primal peoples, and even, you know, the Greeks and the pre-Socratics and the Socratics and a lot of the philosophers of the 18th, 19th century and the Transcendentalists, Emerson, Thoreau, all of these people spoke about reincarnation, but somehow that story got suppressed by some in the Western religion. So just let the notion of it, if it hasn't been something available to you. Let the notion of that start to feed your, just see if the concept starts to make sense and start to give you some information that might help you. And, you know, I was thinking too, Jocelyn, that it's like breaking a spell once we get the truth out of a situation like this. And I was thinking, just this morning, it occurred to me that a memory that I had at some point of being a nun, where I had visions, and the priest in charge of my convent or community didn't want me to speak of my visions, so he silenced me, and I was never again able to speak of my visions again. And you know, I have had throat chakra things in this life, and I remember when I watched that darling little movie with my kids of The Little Mermaid, when she was under this spell and she lost her voice, and all the things she had to go through to get her voice back, you know, all the like witch and the demons and the, you know, the horrible things. But then when the spell was broken, she was able to get her voice back. And it made me feel, when I saw that, like there is something about breaking the spell of an old idea that it was not okay to speak what was actually my inner life, not okay to speak about it, that there was going to be some trouble to come. And so there's spells that can be broken. And when the spell is broken, the energy can be freed up. So that's some of the work that we can do. And I think it's all leading us into more self-compassion and hopefully compassion for others and empathy. And, you know, some of the shadow work will help us, I think, with creating that connection to one another and to our own histories.
So I have one more question for you.
Sure.
What can we do with the information then once it's revealed? How can we really work with it and, I guess, integrate it into our lives? Like, what may have come through during this meditation that you shared with us just now?
I think the thing to do is to take it into your heart. The heart is an organ of perception. The mind isn't going to know what to do with it. So it's take it into your heart, the information, and see, the heart knows, and the heart understands, and the heart can lead us and guide us. And there's a thinking apparatus in the heart. So I think the head can help us to a certain level, and then you defer to the wisdom of the heart. And I think often that is going to lead us to the ways of empathy, compassion, understanding, connection, and to our own true self-identity. And then also take it into your dream life, like really ask for dreams about what to do with the information. And often the dreams are most generous. And again, you know, heart wisdom and dream wisdom are kind of suppressed information that, you know, that we can recover now too, that somehow our own way of understanding how the heart thinks has been overridden by a lot of the head thinking in the last few centuries. And the same with dreams. The head thinking and the rational mind and so forth has marginalized the wisdom of the dream. So I think get back to those ways. And I think a lot will come to us about what to do with the information. It's, you know, a lot of it's just making it conscious, and then you know what to do. But, you know, as the questions remain, I would say go into those places and then just sort of get out a little outside of the ego identity into your soul identity and understand this long trajectory of your eternal nature will have some guidance and information for you. And sometimes we're so worried about the consequences of our ego identity and whether we're going to upset someone or upset ourselves, or by living into the reality of what's happening. You know, you just need to put the ego in its place and let the self have its voice. So
it's a search for truth.
And I think,
no matter how
right,
you go through that search, or it might, you know, cause friction with, you know, someone you're close to, or who knows what the concern might be. But it's a search for truth, and it's so important for us to discover the truth, not live in the lies anymore.
Right. And there's something in the status quo that is very, like, really, that's part of the density. It just doesn't want us to break out.
Stay in the
and
box.
so there's a lot to go through in order to break through the ways that it just tries to keep you where it thinks you should be, or where we think is safe to be. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for all of this. This has been really, really wonderful and exciting to talk about. I do want to share with everybody about your 2 free gifts that you're offering. And so for those who are listening live, I will put the link to both of these in the chat in a moment once I share them. And then for those who are watching this as a recording on the event website, just scroll down a little bit below this interview and you'll see the links to click on to access these free gifts. So first one is a drawing for a free DreamWork session with you. And Tayria will be randomly choosing 3 people to win a DreamWork session from all of the entries. So if you click on the link I'll give you, it's just a short survey to fill out, and you can leave a note for Tayria if you would like to in that survey, and she will choose those 3 names. And did you want to say anything else about that?
I will be drawing 3 names, and there will be free sessions, but for anyone who wants to, from this event, have a discounted session, I will work with the discount. I haven't come up in my mind yet, but I'll give a discounted session to somebody who doesn't win but really wants a DreamWorks session.
Yeah, okay. And should I provide your email address for people to reach out to you then for that? Is that the best thing? Okay.
Yeah, Tayria at TayriaWard.com.
Okay.
TAYRIA at TayriaWard.com.
Okay. So I'll put all this in the chat in just a moment. And the other free gift is really exciting. And this is to join our monthly Global Dreaming Symposium. And this is an event that Tayria and I are hosting monthly that we've been doing since February of 2016. So we're just having our 1-year anniversary, and it has grown, and it has, the dreams are getting so strong. It's really powerful work. And so you can join free and be a part of this dreaming community and either share your dreams or just listen to the dreams that are coming through to the group. It's been really incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Indigenous people tell their dreams to each other every day. And so Jocelyn and I are wishing that we had that in our lives. So we've created this so that we can have it in our lives to tell each other our dreams and talk about them.
I welcome you all to go ahead and claim those free gifts. And don't worry, I will put them in the chat, but I just want to get the Q&A started, and then I'll do that. So we have actually 2 Morgans in the who have raised their hands. So wonderful. So we'll talk to one Morgan who I believe we spoke with you yesterday. So welcome back. Let's see, she should be coming through in a minute here. Welcome, Morgan. Can you hear us? Can you hear me? I can't hear you right now. Not sure what happened there. Let's see. Morgan, can you try to say something? I don't know. She doesn't seem to be coming through, but I have her here as a panelist. Okay. Morgan, we'll come back to you and try in just a minute. Not sure what happened there. Okay, so the other Morgan, I'm going to bring you over now, and then we'll have Shannon after Morgan. Hi, Morgan. Welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, is it echoing?
Just very faintly.
Okay. I'm so sorry. I have it on my phone and my computer because I was having trouble.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I just wanted to say that the both of you, I didn't make any of the other talks yesterday, but the both of you are just, I think I'm supposed to be listening to what you have to offer. Oh, and I'm sorry from yesterday. I realized I mispronounced your name, Dr. Ward. So sorry for that.
That happens every day. It's fine.
Okay. But I just wanted to say, as far as this lineage work that we have to do and how that's the greatest gift that we can give to our children. I just felt that recently something I call contract work has been coming through, and it's just the conscious intention to break all of the previously made contracts that might have been made under duress, potentially when we're watching loved ones be, I mean, some really intense, can you get rid of this? Some really intense stuff can happen to us and make us do whatever it takes to have someone else's suffering stop or have our own suffering stop. And those things don't go away in one lifetime. They really hang on, like you said. And I did some conscious work the other day where I said, I don't need to know exactly what agreements were made, but I know that there's some that have not been broken, some contracts I've made that have not been broken, that are holding me back. And I just said, I release them all now. And I did it in ceremony on the eclipse. And ever since, it's like almost too much to handle the energy that's coming back into my body. And that's just like, I'm trying to learn how to, navigate it and remember to eat. But like, I'm coming from super low energy. Feels like the weight of the world has been sitting on me my whole lifetime. And I know that my mother and her mother and her grandmother have this deep abandonment issues throughout the family. And I feel like my work now is to do that. And I had a conversation, to do that difficult work of asking the ancestors to guide me and why I came to manifest. And I had this conversation with my mom this morning right before your talk, and it was like 2 hours long. And I just said, my hope for you is just that you are able to experience more joy in your life, and that you're an extremely powerful woman, because no other woman could have brought a person like me into the world. And I'm not trying to be big-headed, but I think we can be, because for too long we've been told we're not, allowed to be. So I don't feel like it's an ego thing. I feel like it's just remembering who you are and what you are. And our work is important, but to do it, you have to acknowledge the power that we wield. So that's all I had to say. And I just watching you and listening to you really helps me put this stuff to words, because it wasn't coming into words before. So thank you.
That's great. It's working with all of our concepts a little bit. And I think that's what helps us articulate it, right? And once we can articulate it, there's more work that we can do, the more we find words. The contract work is really good. I'm so glad that you're understanding that. And I think that's really a part of how to articulate what happens, where energy gets suppressed and stories get suppressed, because we make a contract with ourselves for whatever reasons to suppress it, and then have to release ourselves from those later. So that's beautiful work. And good for you for honoring your mother in the way that she, mothers deserve to be honored. They're, big time for bringing us in. So and you are one, I know. So yeah.
Thank you.
Blessings in your motherhood.
Thank you, Morgan. Have a beautiful day. Okay, now we have Shannon. So Shannon, I will bring you over, and then we have Nicola after Shannon. Let's see, Shannon, I'm trying to, there we go. Hi, Shannon, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Hi, Shannon.
How are you? Hi, how are you?
Hi.
Nice to be here.
Nice.
It's been wonderful. I've been soaking it all in, enjoying it very much. And that process was, I had an awareness process, and I just wanted to ask you a question about it. So I was in the process, and I felt like I had broken through some victim patterning and into some more power patterning, and looking at lineage issues around victim to power kind of stuff.
Shannon,
I was
connection is breaking up quite a bit, so we're having trouble understanding what you're saying.
Okay.
There.
Is that better, or I can rotate around here?
I don't know if if you could easily move to a different room, or because, so I get I get an indicator of whether your connection is good or bad, and it's all red right now, which means it's pretty low. So
okay, I can move towards the window. Does that help?
Maybe try that. Yeah, go ahead and share again, and we'll see if we can hear you better.
Yeah, start over again, and we got a little bit of it.
Okay, thank you. So I had a break through the weeks, and then I went into that again when you let us do going into the roots of the tree. And it felt like there was a movement from like being a victim, powerful, and that's like some work in my lineage. And I was wondering your thoughts on how to best with a teenager who, I know modeling is a great thing, clearly, but how to just share this with a teenager who want to hear it, who doesn't want to hear it. And the awareness I got was around like a metamorphosis, like my daughter's young and she's in a, like, you know, when you see a butterfly and they're in the little cocoon stage, there's only that she can take. So I guess I'm answering my own question, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on this. How to share these deeper generational truths and issues with my daughter so she doesn't feel like it's all her. There's something bigger going on here. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. You know, and I think that's a beautiful question, Shannon, and something we should all be asking. You know, I would say it's a delicate thing with children, because sometimes if I say to my daughters, you know, your grandmother or your grandfather used to, you know, do something that sort of, that I can see that they're somehow have inherited this quality or a tendency that sometimes that either helps or doesn't help them. And sometimes I find some resistance in that because they want to think of themselves as autonomous self, and the idea that they're, so there's a delicacy to be understood, at least in my experience, around all that.
Yes, I agree.
As gently as we can bring it into even our conversations about, as you were saying, modeling is always the good thing. Is like, well, my mother used to have this fear, and so now I realize I struggle with the fear and inherited it. You know, so ways that we can kind of give the idea without, there's something about working with someone else's unconscious that they feel like they've been caught with their pants down and they don't like it.
Yes.
You probably know. I mean, none of us do. It's like, it's scary. So if we can kind of pull our pants down a little bit and say, this is the way it occurs to me.
Beautiful. I like that. So just kind of share from the self. Be vulnerable. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Because people don't like to be
that's helpful.
Conscious.
No.
Nobody does. It's a really hard thing to do. So there's a finesse and a, you know, and an empathy and a you know, a caring to be applied. But I think it's a really beautiful question to, you know, to bring whatever stories we can, you know, surely there's like myths and stories that tell these truths.
Yes.
So, you know, if you come up with some good ideas, share with us. If anybody has any ideas of what the myths and stories are, but, you know, those are often the ways that these truths get told without sort of getting too direct with someone in a way that they might not be comfortable with.
Sure.
So I think just, you know, as Rilke says, it's the question that's the important thing. So the fact that you're asking the question, like, how do I help my children understand that not to take themselves so personally, as James Hillman says.
Right.
Just don't take yourself so personally. It's not personal.
Right.
Who you are is not personal. So
we just want them to get it sometimes before they can even get it. Do you know what I mean? I'm just like, oh, it's
yeah. Well, just the fact that you're really asking the question and trying to make it conscious, you know, ask your guides and your children's guides. Often I ask my angels to work with their angels to help me figure out, you know, whatever the best method or approach might be. But it's just a good thing to be working with intentionally. create the intention.
And we can work on other levels too. I'm glad you said that. Work on other levels with it. Going directly feels overwhelming to the kid, right? It's like, shut up, mom, you know, or whatever. It's like, yeah, I like what you're saying. We can still work with it on other levels.
Yeah, you can talk to the child's guides and angels and say, help my child with this, and help me if there's something I can do to help them. But
absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Shannon. Have a beautiful
Thank you, guys.
day.
You too.
Okay, we have Nicola. And maybe one question for you, Tayria, before I bring Nicola over. Someone has asked, I want to learn Jung's shadow work and dreams. Any book or resource that you recommend? Is there anything in particular that you would recommend for someone getting started on that path and wanting to read some of Jung's work?
There's a favorite little book of mine by Robert Johnson. It's called Owning Your Own Shadow. He's a wonderful Jungian author.
Okay.
And there's another one called Romancing the Shadow. I can't remember who edited it, but it's a series of essays by Jungian thinkers on working with the shadow. So Romancing the Shadow, Owning Your Own Shadow by Robert Johnson. Yeah, start with those.
Okay, I put those in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Okay, let me bring Nicola over. Welcome, Nicola. Hi, how are you?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Mm-hmm.
I just want to thank you both for, I think talks like this are absolutely crucial right now for soul work. And I think these juicy breadcrumbs, as you were saying, that's what it is. I just think it really gets to the root. And here in Wales, where I live in the UK, our culture has been suppressed as well. The Welsh language, back in the 1950s and 60s, we were punished if we spoke Welsh. My grandmother said that she used to get hit by the school teachers if she ever spoke Welsh. And it's only changed the last 20 years or so. It's been introduced into schools where we actually are taught Welsh. So I think, you know, even in cultures today, the Celtic culture is suppressed. And I think it comes out in Welsh people do not get on with English people. And that comes out in the sport. I think the shadow of it is reflected in sport. Yeah. And I just think it's so crucial to take, you know, this emotional responsibility. And I think this victim mentality, we can all play the victim card, or we can do the shadow work, as you say, and take responsibility for ourselves. And I think that's how we become an integrated person, you know, by the individuation process, as Jung would say. And not following that. I think it's very crucial to break out of the patterns, the unconscious patterns that our family and our culture have suppressed and lived out and inflicted upon us. I think the only way out of that is by conscious living. And talks like this obviously raise awareness for that kind of living. And yeah, dream work is another, as you say, is another part of that. I've actually just finished reading a book called The King of Atta Are Waiting for You by Dorothy Brinant. Yes, and it's a novel written in the 70s, I think. How it's like our culture used to say their dreams every day to each other. They spoke about their dreams and how integrating that side of themselves, how that's how they lived. And it's just an amazing way to, I think it's a really idealistic way to live. But the when you talk about reincarnation, I used to believe in it. I'm not sure if I believe in it literally. Would you say that it's more of a metaphor as opposed to, oh, I as an ego will be reincarnated into a different person? Or would you say it's more of a metaphor, like we can tap into the acoustic records of certain personalities? Would you say it's more of a metaphor for who we are, as opposed to our ego, the same who we are as an ego getting reincarnated?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a wonderful question. I think the metaphor approach to how to understand reincarnation is a safe way to think of it in any case, no matter what, whether it turns out that there's something literal or not. The metaphoric story is giving you the information you need. So, my personal sense of it is, through the experiences that I've had, is I do sort of have that Eastern Hindu way of just believing that we come back and we continue our development in that way. That's just what I seem to think happens. Until we can prove it beyond the shadow of a doubt, I don't know, but I've seen enough to feel that it's proven to me in my particular way. However, I think no matter what, the metaphoric way of looking into it is the way to go. Even if it's literal, I can't know what that person having that experience actually felt or thought, but metaphorically, if I go into the imaginal realm with it, I can begin to discern what it really wants me to work with right now. So, I think to get too literal about it is a danger. It can overwhelm the current personality anyway, if even, no matter what the truth might or might not be of it. I think that there's a real caution that needs to be held around that, taking it too literally, or or allowing yourself to be overwhelmed by the story of something that happened before that you're just now, trying to work with the story. But so I just think working with the stories and the metaphors is really the most basic way to hold the idea. And I know there are, many people who just don't think that happens literally. And I really respect that we all need to approach such ideas being true to our own sense of it. So, yeah. And it's a mystery, right? It's a very mysterious thing. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Does that help?
It does. Yes. I think working with myth, I think we lack that in our culture at the moment. And I think talks like this, and the more we open up about mythology, reincarnation, storytelling, I think, and our dream work as well, I think the more we get in touch with that side of ourselves. And I think the talk that Barbara Marx Hubbard said yesterday, she said the importance more of being than doing, she said towards the end of her talk. And I think too many people, especially in the New Age movement, they put too much emphasis on the doing. They think, that I'm only going to get in touch with my soul if I do this, if I work with this certain crystal, if I take this course, this workshop, etc., the 10 steps to this and that. I think it's more about going within and getting in touch with nature as well as our own nature. We can read thousands of books, but I think the more we go within and do that inner work and be as conscious as we can, and bringing out the unconscious, as you were saying earlier, instead of our life becoming fate, I think Jung refers to this. If we are unconscious, life will turn into fate and things will happen to us. Or we can become conscious, and then destiny. That's what destination is. The more conscious we are and integrated, the more holistic and integrated we are as an individual. And I think our soul will come and reflect from that, our true being, the feminine side of ourself, which has been underrated. Our true nature will be reflected by our inner journeys. The more we go within, the more holistic we will feel in our external life. So yeah, I feel that reincarnation and mythology and all the things we've been talking about is so crucial right now. But yeah, Thank you for answering that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like what you're saying about being and doing, and I thought
Yes.
the Indigenous way was more about being. And
Yes. Yeah.
I read one place that this Indigenous people I was studying, they did all of their work in 2 days of the week, and the other 5 days of the week were for ritual and conversation.
Yes.
Wouldn't
Yeah.
that be nice?
That
5
makes
days.
way more sense.
Pardon?
That makes way more sense.
Way more sense
than
than
this madness we're doing.
now. We switched that up where it's 5 days a week of work and 2 days, if you're lucky, of relaxation or conversation. Yeah.
Hopefully we'll get to that place.
Right. Yeah. I just think you can't do the inner work if you're too busy. You have to
No.
stop the busyness. Yeah. One of my
Exactly.
clients said that the other day, and I thought that's really true. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you need space.
Yeah.
Space and silence.
Yeah. Thank you, Nicola.
Thank you.
Blessings in you and your Welsh people. All blessings and in holding on to your beautiful history and language.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nicola. Have a beautiful day.
And yourselves. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Okay. Does anybody else have a question? There was one question in the Q&A, Tayria. Someone was asking, what is the beautiful plant that you have to your right? It has a beautiful energy. She is divine, Natalie said. I'm not sure if they meant that one or the taller one, but do you know what it's called? Either of them are called?
Well, this one is my little Christmas tree. It's a little evergreen that
Okay.
I'm waiting for the ground not to be so cold, and I'm going to plant it.
Yeah.
So this is just a little Christmas tree, and this is, I don't know the name of this. It's an ivy, and I have them all over the house. I'm so glad that someone is enjoying the plant. It's just been a part of my life. It's one of those ones that I shouldn't know the name of it. I've had them forever. They're long vines and they just grow everywhere. I have them all over my house. They're so forgiving. I kill plants easily, but these just don't die. Thank God. So we get along great. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Nobody else has raised their hand. So let's see. Oh, okay. Barbara, we do have a question in the chat. Oh, and now we have a hand raised too. Okay. So here's a question that, of course, we don't know the answer to, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And then we'll take the one more person with their raised hand. We talked about our belief that we come from the stars. So if we came from the stars, who created the stars? That's a beautiful question.
Yeah, it is. That's the eternal question, isn't it? I think that's just the question. There is some kind of divine urge that brought us all into being. I actually had a vision of the Big Bang once. I feel like something in my eternal memory saw the bang happen. But something created that. Some people have different names or different concepts for what that divine urge to create is about, the creator, and what the cosmological story is. But what is different to different people. Yeah. How to conceive of it. But it's a beautiful question to always be asking. Somebody asked about the symposium on the 27th, Tuesday. Actually, we moved it to Friday because there was something that conflict.
Yeah, we're doing that special workshop that's following this event. We're doing that.
Right. So it's on Friday of that week at 1:00 Eastern. I think that's March 1st. So
it's March 2nd. It is March 2nd, Friday, March 2nd.
Friday, March 2nd. Okay.
Yes.
So I'm glad that was brought up because normally it's on a Tuesday, but this month it's moved over.
Yes. And I do want to also give everybody, before we close here, I want to give everybody the link to our special workshop that Tayria and I are doing on February 27th. That's why we had to move the Dreaming Symposium that week. And this is the follow-up conversation that we'll have after you've experienced all of the interviews in this event. And our workshop is called The Ancient One Within You, Awakening and Remembering. And it is to really help you to take all of the information, the insights, the remembrances that you have experienced during this event, and help you to find some ways to integrate that into your life and really know how to move forward powerfully rather than being overwhelmed or forgetting about it, you know, to really take this information and use it in a beautiful way. So let me include that link here. So you can sign up at this link if you are interested. And again, that is called The Ancient One Within You, Awakening and Remembering. So we hope you'll all attend. So, all right, I think with that we will close. Did you have any last thoughts for us, Tayria, before we close the live interview?
Well, mostly just thank you to the people who are here, and I'm going to look forward to going through the chat because it looks like there's been some lively discussion there, and so I just so appreciate what you're doing, Jocelyn, to bring all these conversations into our lives, and I appreciate the people who show up for them, and all great blessings in your work going forward. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the day's talks as well as the rest of the 10 days.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, thank you so much for all that you are doing to make this happen as well. And thank you to everybody who's attending. It's just so beautiful to have this global community joining together from all around the world and really supporting one another and being here for one another. So beautiful.
Many, many blessings. And where do we find this, the chat later? Will that
I am posting them on so, you know, if you go to the event schedule page is the best place to start. And then you can scroll down to any of the speakers and click on the link that says, click here to see interview and free gift. And so you'll see the interview once it's been posted, and then the free gift and the chat for the live interviews, the chat will be posted below that person's free gift.
You're so
we'll all be there.
Thank you, Jocelyn. You work so hard for all of us. Thank you so much.
And so also want to remind everybody who's on here now live that we will have another interview in about an hour and a half at 1 p.m. New York time with Dr. John Ryan. So that will be wonderful and amazing too, I'm sure. Hope you can all join us then. All right. Thank you, Tayria. Have a beautiful day.
Blessings to everyone. Okay.
Yes, blessings to everyone.
Yes.